Okay, welcome everyone. This is the first of our member talk series this year, and we have and I'm the vice chair of the Young Academy. Most of you probably know me already, who's here in this session. What we planned to do for this year's member series was to take a slightly different format, and instead of presenters just talking about their work, we have identified potential synergies between members, and there has been conversations that has happened before the talk, so you can identify some points of interaction, and hopefully this will spark new ideas and it will lead to future collaborations. So the idea is not just presenting the work, but also thinking about future collaborations. Great, so we've got our first talk by Gianvito Vile, and the topic is Rethinking Chemical Manufacturing with Atomically-Precise Materials. And the floor is all yours, Gianvito. Take it from here.
Thank you very much, also for the opportunity to give some snapshot of my research in Milano. So actually, as I just said, I'm an associate professor of chemical engineering in Politecnico di Milano, and my research is in the field of catalysis, which involves, actually this is the interface of surface science, but also the use of this material for chemistry, chemical synthesis. So it also involves some organic synthesis. And yes, so basically why we are doing this. The main goal is actually we want to green fine chemical synthesis. So this is how we typically nowadays produce chemicals. So we use typically homogeneous catalysts. These are catalysts that are solubilized in a solvent in a batch reactor. We use a lot of solvents, but all this concept actually at the end up forming a lot of waste, and the waste is typically byproducts that are generated during the reactions. They use.
Sorry, could I interrupt?
Yep. Yes.
We can't hear you very clearly. Would you? Okay. There is a lot of background hiss.
Okay, I try to perhaps.
Could you maybe increase the volume if you can't get rid of the hiss?
Yeah, perhaps I will. Can you hear me better now? Perhaps I will remove my headset.
Yeah.
Can you hear me better? Yeah. Okay. So basically, I was mentioning that we are. There is a lot of attention in trying to make the synthesis greener and more sustainable, and the way we do this is to rethink the way we are currently doing synthesis, manufacturing. So basically replacing this type of catalyst with solid catalyst that can be recycled multiple times, and therefore they don't get wasted after each single reaction, and also making basically the reaction using greener solvent for those reactions, so avoiding the use of organic toxic solvents. So we are doing this in our group by actually redesigning a new type of catalyst, and in particular, these are the type of catalysts that have been quite popular within fine chemical manufacturing. These are so-called homogeneous catalysts. Homogeneous because they tend to be solubilized in a solvent. They have like an active metal, which is modified by an organic ligand, typically. They are catalysts that are very active, very selective. So basically they worked very well, but they are difficult to separate because simply they are solubilized, and they are also quite unstable. Heterogeneous catalysts are, so solid catalysts basically are the counterpart. They can be separated because they're solids, they don't get solubilized, but they have a problem. Actually, they are unselective and less stable and less active, And this unselectivity and less activity comes from the structure of this catalyst. Here we have atoms, metal atoms, for example, that are in multiple locations, and each of these atoms, those that are on the surface, on the surrounding, those that are on the facet, those that are on the steps, they all behave in a different way, and this leads to unselectivity, which is a big problem, of course, because if you generate unselective product, therefore this leads to wasteful generation of products that are undesired, and actually this leads to a reaction which is not green. So what we are doing is to generate catalysts that are solids, so they resemble the structure of this heterogeneous catalyst, but at the same time, they have the molecular organization of an homogeneous catalyst. So we have this isolated metal within a surface. This surface is a 2D material, and therefore, by using actually a special type of interaction, we put this metal in these cavities, and we make catalysts that are active and selective, like the homogeneous catalyst, but easy to separate and stable, like a heterogeneous catalyst. So this is basically the concept of my research. And the goal is really to use this type of catalyst to replace this old and very commonly exploited homogeneous catalyst. How do we make this material? Well, we can use multiple approaches. These are some of the synthetic methods to do so. It involves actually a solid state synthesis to first prepare the supports and then immobilize the atoms. But independently of the method that we choose, we ended up actually forming basically a 2D material, a 2D layer material with some metal, isolated metal on it. Of course, when we prepare this catalyst, we also want to prove that the catalyst has this structure. So we use a lot of physical chemistry and physics, actually, methods to characterize this material. So these are some of the very quick snapshot of the research that we do. So actually, we do exactly XRD to prove that the structure is there. We prove the porosity by nitrogen physisorption. This is a microscopy with a very high magnification, where you see actually these metals that are these dots that you see with these bright dots are actually the isolated metals that I've shown in a molecular structure before, which are well dispersed and are actually dispersed all over around the surface. We also can zoom in one of these dots that I've shown in the previous picture, and therefore you can see that this is actually the single atom which has been zoomed in, and we can make a spectroscopic analysis of this area, and therefore we see, of course, a lot of carbon and nitrogen, because the support is actually a nitrogen-doped carbon material. But we also can see the spectroscopic evidence that this metal, for example, is nickel. So actually the metal is there, and therefore we can prove that the catalyst has the right structure. Of course, once we also do more advanced characterization, for example, at the synchrotron, by proving that actually understanding what is the right structure of this material. So this is basically, we take the catalyst, we put a lot of energy of it, and we try to see how the material responds to this X-ray, and therefore we record the signal, and then we compare the signal with some reference material, like you can see here in blue, yellow, and black. But we also make some Fourier transform, and therefore we can see that the material actually doesn't have, this is actually our catalyst, doesn't have any, it only has a nickel nitrogen bonds. So it proves actually that the nickel is coordinated to these nitrogen bonds which are present on this carbonaceous type material, and we don't have any nickel-nickel bond. And the absence actually of this nickel-nickel bond is the proof that we don't have nanoparticle in this material, and therefore we really have this atomically dispersed catalyst. Of course, we also use some more advanced techniques like YAE to also make a more clear investigation about the coordination and the structure of the catalyst. For example, here we have taken a lot of molecularly simulated structure. We try to fit the previous spectra that you have it here with some of this simulation, trying to see what is the structure which fits this experimental evidence, and therefore we can also get a better overview of the real structure of this material. So once we have done all this work, so we prepare the catalyst, we characterize very deep using also physical methods. We do the real chemistry to exploit this material and to prove how this material works. And therefore you can see in these slides that we have produced a lot of very complex organic compounds, which are typically made using the homogeneous catalyst, but we have made them using the solid catalyst that can be recovered and reused in multiple cycles. So in this case, you don't have to change the catalyst for each single compound, but you can use the same catalyst for everything. So the synthesis gets much greener. And also you can see that the yields are quite high. So in some cases 94, 94, 90. These are just some selection of the years that have been reported actually. 89, 94. In some cases, they're slightly lower, but this is quite common, but they are quite high yield. So it proves that the catalyst can be actually efficient in catalyzing the synthesis of very complex organic compounds that are typically difficult to make using a standard catalyst. And actually, you can recover the catalyst and reuse multiple times. For example, here we have re-prepared the same catalyst several times. So we have prepared the same molecule several times using the same type of catalyst multiple times, and you can see that the reaction rate is quite stable. It can be reused multiple times, and if we characterize the same catalyst after each of this run, well, basically you don't have any variation. So the spectroscopic analysis, X-ray absorption spectroscopy profile is the same of the original catalyst before any reaction. So it proves actually the stability of this catalyst. We've also done some analysis to understand how sustainable are these catalysts by investigating also the CO2 emission to make this type of catalyst compared to the original homogeneous catalyst. Typically, what I've not mentioned initially is that when you use an homogeneous catalyst, you also have to use additional ligands and modifiers. So if you count actually the CO2 of all these items, actually you ended up generating a lot of CO2 compared to the single atomically controlled catalyst, which doesn't involve any modifier, and therefore you really can make actually a more sustainable catalyst. So you can see we have cut down the CO2 emission of catalyst production from almost 400 kilogram of CO2 to 800, so actually of 1/4, more than 1/4. So it's quite more sustainable than the previous methods. So, well, basically, this is some snapshot of my research. I really try to tackle the most important aspects. The collaborator, of course, with whom we collaborate, we have a network, of course, all around Europe and also in Asia, and my group, which is here, the funding bodies, and of course, if you have any question, I will be very happy to address them.
Great, thank you very much for the very rapid sort of summary of all your work. So I will now invite, who wants to go first, Wolfgang or Zhang?
On the schedule, I comes first.
Okay, yeah, great. Zhang, go ahead.
All right. Okay, great. So yeah, so my name is Chao Zhang. So I'm a associate professor in chemistry at Uppsala University, and so my background is on the computational chemistry. So we work on the electrochemical systems, so both electrified solid liquid interface and also for the electrolyte design. Yeah, very nice presentation, Gianvito. Yeah, I think it's very, very, I mean, it's exactly 12 minutes. I think it was well done. So because your title was about chemical manufacturing, right? So if I understand, this is another way of saying about how one could do materials design. And so as I understood, so you're working with a single atom catalyst. And so if I ask you, so what will be let's say the design space for the single atom catalyst? So can you give us sort of idea about what dimensions actually can you explore when it's come to this type of systems?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. And actually, this is, I mean, as you know, these are actually at the moment also topics. Well, I think that there is a lot to be done there. So we have been studying this type of catalyst that are shown. So this type of nitrogen carbon nitride actually is the real name of the supports, but yeah, with some earth abundant metal, but the design space is vast. So of course we can change different type of metal. We can change also the supports. And I think we initially we were thinking that the support was just there, was innocent, was doing nothing, and this was why they're called single atom catalyst. But actually we now understand more and more that the support has a really huge and important function. So there is really an aspect to design also the supports and to coordinate better these metal, these atoms. And how to do this? Well, we can then the world is really exploding much more because we can use COF, we can use MOF, we can use much more material, and therefore the design is really varied consistent.
So you can change different metals, different
Exactly.
substrate,
And
and
I think
then
the
yeah.
theory there is really helpful, as you also pointed out initially, by pointed out actually your background, which is this come from the DFT and theoretical chemistry, because it also can help to guide us experimentalists to design better ligands, to design better carriers, to say, okay, we have to optimize this type of property to lead to this type of material. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So because right now I'm currently visiting MIT for 4 months for my sabbatical. So when I see the lab, I mean, actually there is quite some activities on the development of autonomous and also robotic experiments. So when it comes to, let's say, single atom catalyst design, so do you think that there is actually a role where this autonomous experiment or robotic experiment can be useful there? Yeah.
Yeah, I fully think so. I agree, and I think it's a beautiful concept that also you put forward. So there is something that has not been done yet, but it's an area which, of course, can lead, because this material are done at the moment by humans. So this means also the human synthesis can lead to errors. So if we can standardize the synthesis by having autonomous machine-guided synthesis, this actually can help to avoid, to make more systematic catalyst design. And actually, this is a way perhaps to bypass one of the major challenges of this material, which is how difficult it is to make this material.
Right. The synthesis is still the bottleneck, I
Yeah.
guess. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you very much. I think that's that were my questions. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. Then I might continue. My name is Wolfgang Tress. I'm from Zurich University of Applied Sciences, electrical engineer and physicist working on novel materials for photovoltaics, perovskite solar cells. And in this field, we're also working very experimentally. We have absorber materials, and we need to make these materials as thin films, so it's more a bulk property. But on the other hand, there is like many challenges in terms of passivating these materials, in terms of kind of getting the interfaces right. And there I see some connection points to this, like, atomically scale kind of synthesis approach. So since you talk now all the time about, of course, about the catalysts, what is your view on how can this approach of making these materials, I don't know, using this curve and then placing these atoms, how easy it is to transfer, let's say, to other problems if you would like to place somewhere atomically controlled on our solar cell something to passivate, let's say, a certain type of defect, maybe beyond or goes direction towards self-assembly of monolayers, which we're also using. What would you say there?
Well, it's a very challenging and hard question to address. I think that at the moment the material here are done by these catalysts particularly are done by wet chemistry, and this is the way typically catalysts are prepared. Of course, we can use 2D type material like chemical vapor deposition and physical. So these are methods that have been reported also. And this leads to more controlled layers. And this type, I guess, of methods could be perhaps more relevant for solar cells and that material where you really need a clean and surface and perfectly surface layer. But to be honest, I don't know where we are there, because it's also an area which I'm not closely following, the area of solar cell. So yeah. So I don't know what it has been done in this area. This is something which
And yeah, when we talk about kind of trying to organize, let's say, the material on the atomic scale, there is of course always coming up the dream of the materials kind of scientists, that you have materials which to some extent are only stable, but maybe not so stable, but they have self-healing abilities. Even in our material, where we have kind of lattice ions moving, they can kind of move back to the original place. People call this already self-healing. Maybe that's a bit an overstatement, but how do you see this? Is this like arrangements? Are they either like super stable from the beginning, or is there also a trend that they would kind of themselves go back to how they should be, where they should be?
This is an area which is we also see in the catalysis field very recently. So we see this self-healing catalyst, self-healing single atom catalyst, self-healing heterogeneous catalyst. I think that this is an area which has not been explored a lot in the past, where there will be a lot of discoveries in the future, because also there is an attention in the chemistry field, in material science and physics, this interface. There is an attention on smart material at the moment. So, and all what the smart materials can unlock also for manufacturing, for synthesis. So I think that this is an area which where we will see a lot of development in the future. I think that also there will be more and more self-healing single atom catalyst. There has not been a lot developed yet, but we see some increase of publication in this area also.
But in your catalyst at the moment, they are designed in a way that they are then very
They are
stable.
designed to be, exactly, they're designed to have stable, but I think this aspect of self-healing really comes also from what Chao just mentioned before. So if we are able to control better the design space by designing also the carrier in a better way, we can unlock new opportunities like self-healing properties or dynamic properties of this catalyst, where at the moment we cannot unlock because we are at the beginning of the catalyst design. Yes. So I think that it really depends on the design of this material, how we design it, and based on the design, we will unlock new possibilities. Yeah.
Yeah, I think this like sounds very promising. Like it will be like really a research field which is just at its start. Yeah, I'm looking at the time. I don't know, Anna. Do we have more time, or should we like slowly close? Chao, do you want to also comment again something?
I don't know. Maybe others also have a question to ask.
Yeah, we can open it up to others if the discussion between the three has sort of reached to its logical conclusion. Anyone from the audience? Scott.
Yeah, so thank you very much again, Gianvito. Like the others, I enjoyed the presentation, though it's a million miles away from my own field of research. But can you give me some more, I mean, some really good examples of where these materials are used, the materials that you've been working on? Some more kind of concrete examples of their application, for example?
Yeah, so basically it's really, I mean, okay, there are multiple areas here. So we are doing a lot of work in taking this material and using it for organic synthesis, because the way the synthesis has been done for decades, it's really not sustainable, and we want to make it more sustainable by avoiding the use of homogeneous catalysts and replace them with more better, solid, recyclable material. But this area of single atom catalyst, or catalysts in general, atomically controlled catalysts, are finding application in multiple areas. For example, you can use it for wastewater treatment. You have water contaminated by pollutants, and this is also an area which we have partially worked on. And then we want to design, for example, a catalyst, which in that case we will call it membrane, but the catalytic membrane is also a catalyst, which actually has similar structure, but it's when the water passes, these pollutants are degraded, and therefore you can avoid having the so-called persistent pollutants, which is a big United Nations issue actually that we have for our millennium. Or you can generate some small molecules molecules which are very important for energy, like hydrogen. So you can use water splitting, or you can make like electrochemical transformation to generate hydrogen or other small molecules which are used for energy. So you can have a lot of palette of application, from energy to environmental cleaning application to more synthetic green synthesis. But it's really about, the application is really, within the field of chemistry, like using this material to make something which can either make the world a little bit better by avoiding pollution, or making the synthesis that we do better, and which also indirectly means that if the synthesis is more selective, therefore we generate less byproducts, and therefore we generate less pollutants after the synthesis.
Great. Any other questions? All right. I think in the interest of time, we'll probably go to the next section. I'm beginning to realize that we probably need longer sessions for these, even if it is going to be just two groups. But anyway, this is the first time we're trying it out. So the floor is all yours, Jan. We have got Jan, who will be leading us on this discussion of golden age lost, social mobility and democracy in contemporary Europe. So we are switching completely to a very different field, but that is the excitement of these sorts of talks. Go ahead, Jan.
Yes, everybody can hear me now, right? Yeah.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah, so thanks for the opportunity to present my research here, and also come into discussion to see how this can be developed along or across disciplinary boundaries. I will first introduce the general period I'm focusing on as a historian, then something of the sort of research that we have done here over the past 5 years, and then my new research agenda and where I see syntheses, at least with Emily and Scott, but hopefully also wider. So basically, I focused on what is called the golden age of Europe, the period from the early 1950s to the mid 1970s. Now, this golden age comes with a lot of adjectives. It's the golden age of prosperity, the golden age of social mobility. You see the famous picture here, or the poster of the movie picture Room at the top. It was a time of great increasing life chances.
Sorry, could I interrupt again? Sorry, Jan. If you could put your slides on slideshow rather than on the current screen is not on slideshow.
I just clicked on. Wait a sec. I know.
If you go to right,
I'll put F5, right?
Oh, I don't know if it's F5, but if you
if you go to the small down at the bottom of the screen, there's looks like a screen on top of a upside down T, a square with a dash in the middle on top at the bottom.
Bottom right, next to the volume control.
I'll end. So now I'll have it, I think, on screen.
Oh, sorry, you've stopped sharing your screen.
Yes, I know. I did that on purpose. Now I found it. The point is that this. Yeah.
Oh, it's back on the stage.
Yes, right.
Okay, perfect. Sorry to interrupt the flow. Go ahead. Yeah.
No. It was all the. This meeting is recorded. Was over it, so I couldn't find. Okay, good. So you see the movie, the poster of the movie Room at the top. It's known as the Golden Age of Democracy, and there was so much gold to go around that it can even harbor contradictory golden ages, being known as both the Golden Age of Capitalism and the Golden Age of Social Democracy. Now, what does that mean? It is basically these 30 glorious or 30 glorious years of rapid economic growth and increasing living standards, of increased intergenerational mobility and increased life chances, also linked to the move from a rural to an industrial, or from an industrial to a service economy, and of democracy, a period that's often described as a period of reciprocal trust, when there was trust in the political arena with coalitions that often had surplus majorities, so didn't go for the lowest common denominator, but also trust between rulers and ruled, and trust between people within communities. All this talk about doors always being open and people saying hi to each other on the street that you hear about. Now, what commentators, public intellectuals are sure about is that this golden age has passed. And in fact, many of the ills of our current age are often attributed to the end of the golden age. Talk about the widening gap between rich and poor, the haves pulling up the ladder for the have-nots, both in the respect of richer or middle-class people monopolizing chances for their children, but also with regard to closing borders and migration. And this is all seen as a sign of a loss of trust in politicians, a loss of trust by politicians in the people, a loss of trust among people in themselves, which fuels further polarization. Now, we know that most of these stories about the golden age are myths, and historians, sociologists, economists have proven that. So that is not the research focal point. I must say that I began writing this proposal, which in the end became this big project, in part out of frustration about some of the historical illiteracy that came out after the shock 2016 election results. But that is maybe interesting for the public debate. From an academic perspective, we have different questions to answer from an historical perspective. And the first of these is, who was this golden age for, or who stood to benefit from community cohesion, increased life chances, even democracy itself? And here we found that contrary to conventional wisdom, it was often the peasantry, or at least those from a rural background who then moved to cities, and the urban middle class that were the main beneficiaries. I love this poster, where you see that even Labour, the Workers' Party, pitched its offer at middle-class technicians and engineers. That nationalization means a lot more bureaucracy, great chances for engineers. Nobody would publish a poster like that today. But the industrial working class, for all of these notions about a golden age of social democracy or golden age of the worker, was already being left behind when it came to housing outcomes, when it came to educational outcomes under the golden age. So this was not a product of neoliberalism that is often ascribed to. Now, a second question that we investigate revolves around the memory culture of the golden age. Why do we remember the golden age even as a golden age, and who gets to set that debate? Who speaks for the golden age? And there we see that there's the sort of eminence grise, male, most of the cases, elderly statesmen, but also academics or novelists, who make their own autobiography of rising through the ranks, of being the first in their family to go to university, of growing up in cohesive communities in the 1950s and 1960s, have then made a career for themselves, who made that story the story of the golden age. And everybody, at least in my experience, and I've lived in a couple of countries, every now and again, if you turn on the late night talk show, there will be one of these elderly gray men telling how great everything was when they were growing up. And that gets a lot of acclaim. There's a lot of ask for that. And what is left out of that story is most as important. So what are the blind spots for those people who did not get those chances in post-war Europe? What do they tell us? Maybe for women, maybe for migrant workers who had limited chances of improving their career standards, moving in and out of jobs. So what do the fact that we still celebrate this era, and those who promulgate the stories about that era, what does that tell us about contemporary Europe? And then the third, and this is often the important point of my research, how can we study this period in East-West comparison, or in comparison between the communist East and the capitalist West? Now, from the perspective of the golden age of democracy, obviously there are key differences, even though we also see that people's democracy, or the Eastern European people's democracies, are faced with similar challenges as the liberal democracies in the West. But certainly from the perspective of social cohesion and social mobility, this is highly interesting, because the two systems tried different formulas of social mobility and social cohesion. Think of the communist plans to make women skilled workers or managers in industry, or communist plans to integrate Roma into working class communities. Now, all of these emancipatory programs failed spectacularly. And you see that the conservative reconstruction of Western Europe, which may have come from, which is often being ascribed as being come from above, also comes from below in Eastern Europe. So we see a sort of pan-European convergence and a sort of similar set of responses to similar challenges. So that on my research. Now on how I think we can elaborate this with some of the consequences for our own age. Because there was one way in which the time certainly was golden after 1945, and that is in this highly symbolic golden watch. You see a ceremony here that workers got after 25 loyal years with the same employer. And this was with the job security of the 1950s and 60s, was, even though that of course has been mythologized, was a more frequent event. And I'm venturing into the history of time, or the history of temporalities, how historically have humans interacted with time and time regimes. And in that respect, the golden age of Europe represented a sort of golden male life, mostly for the male breadwinner, male life course, in which men felt to have control over their own destiny. This both operates on the day-to-day level, with the factory time where you go to your job at Siemens, at General Motors, at Bayer. You clock in every morning at a set time, you clock out every day, and your life has its rhythm. But it also has it in the form of a career planning, because in these large factories that shaped at least the image of Europe in the 1950s and 1960s, there was a clear career trajectory. You come in as an unskilled worker, then maybe you become a skilled worker, you can rise to foreman or overseer or supervisor. If you go to evening school, you can even make it into management. And that sort of control over time has been lost with the end of the golden age. And indeed, it's often been experienced, you know, as a loss of control over your life. The River, the Springsteen song, which famously, you get a job, you get a trade union card at 90, but then unemployment comes, you don't know what to do with your life, you lie awake at night. And this is not just a Springsteen song, this also comes out of oral history interviews with workers that were in these deindustrialized factories. Still waking up, even though you don't have a job anymore, still waking up at 5 a.m. in the morning because you have to go and clock in at factory, thinking, where has my life gone wrong, and struggling with these new settings of precarious work, of flexible work time arrangement. Mind you, many young people in the 1970s welcomed a more flexible work-life balance. But it begs the question as to whose time matters. And here I want to give the floor also to the discussants, because one final point, it is of course a myth that there was no precarious work under the golden age. It was just not done by the subjects that we consider as the main actors of the golden age. So for today and in history, whose time matters most? With that, I want to end it and give the floor to the discussants. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Ron. Emilian, could I invite you to join the discussion now?
Yes, thanks, Anna. Thanks, Jan, for your talk. From my perspective, so I'm a moral philosopher who is also doing some research in moral psychology, and I'm interested in the question of how we expand the moral circle of morality, in the sense that how do we have inclusive frameworks of taking into account people's interests. And another interest I have is, being a Romanian, Romania was integrated in the European Union in 2007. So I was thinking maybe that for us was the golden age of Europe. But the strangest thing happened in the last years is that you see this use of golden age not only in Europe but also in America and in other places. And the rhetoric of a golden age is used to critically assess the current situation in the sense that we're very in a very bad regression. So by compare with some golden age from the past, we are now in a very ugly situation. So what I've noticed that this correlates with a retraction in our inclusiveness inclinations. So the more you somehow invoke a golden age past, which is very good by compare with our current situation, you kind of see falling back on some sort of tribalistic framework in which it only matters what happens in the in-group. And so I think that this is a very interesting topic and see how rhetoric or discourse about golden age of Europe may in fact be detrimental for current efforts of building European identities. So that would be one comment that I want to make. And second, with regards to loss of control. So because I'm a philosopher, I would kindly ask you to clarify a little bit the concept of loss of control, because there you could distinguish it from social predictability. You could mean biological and scientific control of phenomenon versus social control or social predictability. So I would be interested to hear more about what you mean by loss of control there. So thank you.
Yes. So first, the point, Romania does have its golden age between 1965 roughly and 1975, when Ceausescu is still the darling of the West. There's a lot of credit coming in, and you have this black caviar and Black Sea holidays period before everything turns terrible again in the age of autarky. But in that respect, also there's also this narrative of some sort of golden age for Romania. Now, as for the point, yes, it doesn't bring much, but it's or as you said about a golden age being held up, but not helping inclusivity in our golden age, in our own age, sorry. I would completely agree there that I find it so interesting which dimensions of history are being sketched out. We walk through the House of Europe, the new when I was at Leuven with our history department in Brussels, the new exposition. And from the 1970s, everything turns dark because unemployment is there and everything is going. And I said, have you thought about the color scheme here? Because then afterwards they ask us as historians, because it really goes from light to dark. But in that respect, we do have this period of light which is held up, which is then contrasted with dark, which, yeah, depending on your perspective, from 1973, from 1979 when Margaret Thatcher came to power, or whenever things started to go downhill according to conventional wisdom. I don't think it helps much by shining, let's say, a golden or a rose-tinted light on one period, and then you forget also why we moved on from that period, and why many people in the early 1970s embraced a liberal or neoliberal agenda, because they felt that would bring them forward out of that age that they felt stagnant or they felt repressing their chances in life. Now, loss of control. What do I mean there? So I mean, you could plan out your life. You could do what even though many people didn't want it, but you could do what your father had done. You go to school. Again, this is a male life course. You go to school, you get a factory job, you are the provider, And this is then all lost. And there's a story about Fiat going into reorganization, and workers having to come and sit at the substitute bench every day to see if there's work for them in this furlough period. So you don't have this idea anymore of being able to provide. Now this, of course, then moves into psychology or into bad nights or sleeping poorly, or but that is what I meant in the first instance, is the plannability of your life. Again, this was only available to a select, or well, not to a select few, but this was not available already to many people, even under the golden age. But that is what I meant by this experience of loss of control. And that's maybe why slogans like "Take Back Control" have been so effective in election campaigns. This feeling that you are the master of your own destiny. Again, if you could make all sorts of arguments as to why this already wasn't the case. I hope that answers the questions a little bit.
Thank you, Jan.
Great, Scott.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, I found that a really super interesting talk. It's a perspective I haven't thought about before, because I have teenage boys, sons, and they are part of this year group now, or these teenage young males now, who are, not all, but many, are kind of harking back to this golden age idea of, when that they would ideally like a wife who might stay at home with the children, and so it is this kind of, there is this family model and this life way that is, from this golden age, which these young men are growing into now. And there are all sorts of, influencers online and so on who are kind of pushing this kind of more traditional life way. And of course, women also who are, this kind of trad wife movement. I'm not sure if people know about this, where women also are like, no, I'd like to go back into the home. So there is this, I find it super interesting that you have these young people who have only ever grown up in the life ways that we have now, ultra flexibility in work, but also no job security, all of these kind of people, unaffordable housing, and an uncertain future painted out in climate change and so on. So they're in this kind of extreme flux, but hailing or harking back to a time that they never knew, and in fact, even their parents never knew. It's their grandparents' age, which I find really interesting. So this is really an interesting perspective I hadn't thought about before, and that's because there is this dominant male voice from that time who was kind of telling the story of why this was a golden age. That really was really interesting for me. Part of my own research, I'm a interdisciplinary environmental social scientist, is what I call myself loosely, but I'm interested in how timings are changing in social life, and how timings are changing very quickly, and people are losing a sense of when is the right time to act, what is the right time to do what. And that can be in the everyday, or it can be, like you've said, Jan, in planning your life way, in your kind of whole life, telling the story of your life from, as you say, school to retirement and the gold watch. And I do wonder now, when in this time when everything's in flux, and suddenly there's not just one man's time that matters, dad's time and the factory whistle, but also that there are so many other times at play. Children's timing, when do they have all their clubs? The wife is also working, and all of these other times. How do we take account of these in the democracy now that we're facing now? So this is my interest. I'd like to hear your reflections on it. I'm working with people now on how can we map out all these different times and see where they clash, and how some of the problems that we have in society now come from a time clash. I mean, I deal mostly with environmental things. So, for example, when changes in seasonality about when crops become ripe clash with kind of institutionalized ideas of when you should harvest. So you start harvesting at the wrong time. There's all these mismatches. So I'd be interested in hearing if what opportunities you see there.
Well, obviously, as historians, we would never claim to be able to change the future or to have. But Let me go into that one by one. Yes, so this is correct. So there's a second factor, which I didn't even mention. At the same period that this male life course comes to an end, you start to see begin to see the results of more educational equality on the gender level. So you have also more women who are better or higher educated compared to their husbands. So this adds to this crisis of identity. I always find it very telling that, to the extent that that this can be shown, that most studies show that it is, in the UK at least, only under Margaret Thatcher that men start to vote more right-wing than women, because they always used to vote Labour, because you're in the trade union movement, you're a worker. And it's in this period, ironically under a woman prime minister, that they start voting more right-wing, in what we see now, where men vote considerably more right-wing than women. So this is a little bit of the... Now, I don't want to say, by the way, that the social democratic parties of the 1960s and 1970s were beacons of progressivity, by the way, when it came to gender relations. So in that respect, we can make some qualifications there. But you see this shift, which is still felt today. Yes, why? Thankfully, my children are still under the age of 10. So I'm not at that stage yet. Why people hark back to, well, they always say, right, that you want to live the life that because you rebel against your parents, you want to live the life of your grandparents. You also saw that in the with the economic crisis in Spain, when many children who couldn't afford to started to live with their grandparents somewhere in the rural life and adopted that lifestyle. So maybe there's an explanation. There's an explanation there. How we can organize it more democratically. I mean, it is very difficult. We could at least try to qualify, and then going back to the golden age story that I already addressed with Emilian, try to qualify the image of the golden age that we have. We don't have to say, the longer I do this project, because when I came in, I wanted to challenge the notion of the golden age. But the longer I've done this project, I think that the golden age is actually a decent denominator, but for some people. So for some people, it was actually a golden age. It was much better, obviously, than depression and war that had come before it. So, but that we need to hold an open view as to who is telling that story about the golden age, and that we need to have, I know talk shows love to have the same guest over and over again if they think they make for good ratings, but then maybe we get a little bit of a more variegated perspective on this era, so that we can also address some of the shadow sides of it, while not discarding that it was a good age for, or at least a considerably better age than what came before, for many people. 1 minute left. If there's any other questions.
Yeah, I know. Go ahead. Yeah.
Hello, everyone. My name is Ioana Podina. I'm a professor at the University of Bucharest, Romania, and my work is in digital health. I'm also concerned with research policy, a reason why I'm part of the Young Academy of Europe. So you have addressed a few of my questions. I don't know, the golden age for ladies in the time interval that you have mentioned, and also for the Eastern Bloc, if it was or not a golden age. And I now have a bit of more of an explanation why my parents see it more of a golden age than we do. Now, my question for you, because I'm a person very much oriented in the present, and I know the past is very much important to look into the present. And we also have a saying in psychology, because this is my background, which is that the past behavior is the best predictor for the future behavior and the current behavior. Oh, how would you label the current age that we are living, socially, economically, technologically? Is it possible that, technologically speaking, we might be living another golden age, but a decadence in other layers?
So, yes, two things. So what I found highly interesting is that although they, so you always had this narrative, social mobility was one of the core focus of my research group, that that social mobility was something that cut across the party divide, and that we need to that whether you're left wing or you're right wing, you say social mobility is a good thing. And in the last couple of years, you saw some backlash against that notion. That actually the focus on social mobility brings, and it's true. I mean, there's or investing more in education, again, good from all of our perspectives probably, and also good from the perspective of broadening horizons, but it doesn't do much to help social mobility, and this has been proven over and over again. So what about our current age, I see it still as we're in this long backlash against whatever more freedoms, that's how I see it, whatever more freedoms came to us, not only in the East, but also in the West after 1989, with liberalization, both economically and socially. Are we moving from an age to a different age? That is extremely difficult to say. What I do want to say is, when we had the last election here in Germany, the SPD, which won then, now they've lost, campaigned with this respect, and also respect for Arbeit, respect for labor. And this sort of thing, that was completely, would have been seen as completely out of touch in the new, faster world of the 1990s and the 2000s. So in that respect, I can see a sort of return. I don't think it's all good, but I can feel a sort of return to some of these older ideas that we need security, we need stability, but we also need respect for you as a worker. But again, I cannot predict the future. La histoire se répète. I don't know. It's very dangerous for a historian to say that. But I hope I've at least been able to clarify something.
Yes, thank you.
Great. Any more questions? Well, I had an observation when we were talking about the loss of control, and Emilian raised this idea of, oh, are you talking about sort of biological loss of control? And when you think about how the brain functions, I'm a neurophysiologist, and you work on priors, and you need to reduce uncertainty. And reducing uncertainty is a sort of overarching principle of how the brain functions, and not being able to, whether it is at the level of planning out your day, or if it is at the level of planning out your next movement, it is exactly the same principle. So I guess loss of control is driven by the biology of human body. It's the human brain. So I guess that's what is showing out. We all like routines. We want routines. We want boundaries. But of course, we all say we don't need it. But we know that if we have to, meet a deadline, you've got to have some sort of structure to everything. And if everything is open-ended, then the brain gets very confused. And that's probably what is reflected on this. The loss of control is basically quite literally a loss of control. That's my take on it. And I'm sure there's plenty of studies to show that, at the most fundamental level of just making a movement, the same principles applies as planning out your whole day or your whole life or career or whatever it is. So timescales, it's very odd because when it goes to longer timescales, we always assume that there are different principles at play. No, I think the principle that applies to a nanosecond of making a fundamental movement probably is the same as your entire lifespan. But well, who knows to say? I mean, I think I've just identified so many synergies, so many new projects that came out of this last hour's discussion. It's just brilliant. Anyway, any last comments from anyone? Scott? Okay, well, in which case we'll probably say our first meeting, we'll bring it to a close, and we have a similar discussion in a month's time, 29th of May. And we will soon be sending out who the speakers are and who the discussants are. So if you're able to join, that'll be great. But thank you all very much. This has been extremely interesting. And I look forward to more such sessions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Anna.
Thank you, Anna.
Thank you. Thank you.